He carried her home. He asked for nothing. He lost everything anyway. One act of kindness. One night. And suddenly, the whole company decided they knew exactly what kind of man Liam Carter was. And none of it was true. While everyone else turned their backs, he went home and made his daughter breakfast. While the rumors spread like fire, he stayed quiet. Some people fight back with noise. Liam fought back with silence, and it nearly destroyed him. Hit the like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along to the very end, because this one is going to stay with you. The night it started, Liam Carter was just trying to get through the shift. That was the truth of it. Nothing more complicated than that. He had worked the anniversary event for 11 hours straight, driving executives to and from the venue, standing near the company vans in his pressed gray uniform, while caterers carried trays past him and someone in the lobby played piano badly. He wasn't bitter about it. He had long since made peace with the fact that his job put him at the edges of other people's celebrations, never in the center of them. He was good at the edges. He understood them. Blake Industries had turned 10 years old that evening, and from what Liam could gather, standing near the service entrance, the party was exactly what you'd expect from a company worth $11 billion. Clean white tablecloths, an open bar that nobody hesitated to use, a speech from Vanessa Blake herself that he heard secondhand from one of the kitchen staff. Short, sharp, no wasted words. The way she apparently did everything. He had driven Vanessa Blake twice before that night. Once from the corporate offices to an airport meeting in February, once from a conference to her building in March. Both times she had sat in the back seat with her phone in her hand and spoken maybe 15 words total. She was the kind of person who made the air in a car feel denser. Not unfriendly, exactly. Just contained. Like every part of her was pointed at something he couldn't see. He hadn't thought much about her beyond that. She was his employer in the distant bureaucratic sense. Her name was on the company. His paycheck came from the company. That was the extent of it. By 11:30, most of the guests had cleared out. The event coordinator was collecting name cards from the tables. The bartenders were breaking down their stations. Liam was in the parking structure checking the schedule on his phone when Marcus, the senior driver, came down the ramp with his jacket over his arm and a look on his face like he was already halfway home. "You good to close out?" Marcus asked. "What's left?" "Ms. Blake's still upstairs. Her assistant usually handles getting her home, but Donna left early. Kid's sick. Front desk called up and she's, Marcus paused. "She had a long night." "How long?" "Put it this way. She gave a toast at 9, gave another one at 10, and apparently gave a third one that nobody asked for at 10:45. Marcus shrugged. "It's her company's birthday. She earned it." Liam looked at the time. He thought about Sophie, who was home with his neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, who had her own early morning. He thought about the extra hour this would cost him, and the fact that his rate didn't adjust for late calls. Then he thought about a woman alone in a building who needed to get home safely, and that was the end of the deliberation. "I'll handle it," he said. The event room on the 14th floor had that particular emptiness that big rooms get after a party, the kind that feels louder than the noise that came before it. A few staff members were folding chairs at the far end. A centerpiece had tipped over on one of the tables and no one had bothered to fix it. Vanessa Blake was sitting at the head table with a glass of water she hadn't touched, and her heels off, one hand pressed flat against the tablecloth like she was checking whether the surface was real. Up close, she looked different than she did in the back of a car, or in the company photographs that cycled through the lobby screens. Younger, maybe, or just less armored. Her dark hair had come partially loose from whatever style it had been in at the beginning of the night, and there was a small smear of mascara under her left eye that she either didn't know about or didn't care about. Her dress was the deep navy blue of something expensive. Her posture, even now, was still oddly straight, like her body remembered how to be professional even when the rest of her had checked out. She looked up when he came in, and there was a half second where her eyes focused and then slightly unfocused again. "The cars are still here," she said. Her voice was careful in that way people get when they're working to sound steady. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Liam. I drive for the company. Marcus asked me to check in." "Marcus?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the glass of water. "I don't usually do this." Do what? This. She gestured vaguely at herself, which he took to mean the loosened hair and the bare feet and the general state of having had too much to drink at her own event. It's your company's 10th anniversary, he said. Seems like a reasonable night for it. She looked at him like she was deciding something. That's a diplomatic answer. I'm a driver, he said. Diplomatic's part of the job. Something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of one that didn't quite finish. She picked up the glass of water and drank half of it. Okay, she said after a moment. Okay. Getting her downstairs took longer than it should have. Not because she was incapacitated, she wasn't, but because she was the kind of person who, even 3 drinks past her limit, insisted on doing things herself and then needed twice as long to do them. She found her heels, put them back on, took them off again and carried them. She stopped at the elevator to look at something on her phone, squinted at it, and put it away. In the elevator, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes briefly. Liam stood near the panel and said nothing. He had learned early in this job that silence was more useful than conversation most of the time. What time is it? She asked without opening her eyes. Just past midnight. I have a 7 a.m. call. You've got time. I always have a 7 a.m. call. A pause. That's probably a problem. Probably, he agreed. She opened her eyes and looked at him sideways. You're not going to tell me I work too hard? I don't know you well enough to tell you anything. Most people don't let that stop them. The elevator opened. He walked slightly ahead and to the side, not touching her, just present in case she needed to catch herself. She didn't. She made it to the car without incident, and he held the door and she got in, and they drove through the quiet city streets without talking. Her building was on the Upper East Side, the kind of address that had a name and a doorman who knew which residents tipped well and which ones didn't. The doorman on duty was a heavy-set man named Gene, according to the badge, who looked up when Liam pulled to the curb and seemed to assess the situation in about 2 seconds. Miss Blake, Gene said, opening the car door. Evening. Gene. She started to get out and misjudged the curb height slightly. Liam was already around the car by then, and he steadied her arm without thinking about it. She didn't pull away. She didn't say anything. She let him help her to standing, and then she straightened up and took a breath. I can take it from here, Gene said. I'll walk her up, Liam said. She's okay. I just want to make sure she gets in. Gene looked at him for a moment, a long, searching look, and then stepped aside. Elevators on the right. The penthouse was on the 22nd floor. The elevator opened directly into a private entry with pale walls and 2 large abstract paintings and a floor that reflected the overhead lighting. It was the kind of apartment that looked like it had been arranged rather than lived in. Couch, she said, pointing vaguely to the left, and then seemed to reassess. No. Bed. She moved down the hall, still carrying her heels in one hand, and pushed open a door. Liam stayed near the entry. He could hear her moving around. The sound of something set on a table, a tap running briefly, a closet. Then quiet. He stood there for a moment, not sure what the right thing was. He could leave. He should probably leave. The doorman was downstairs and she was home and safe and apparently managing. Then he heard it. A sound from down the hall that wasn't quite a fall but wasn't quite not one either. A thud. Then silence. He walked down the hall quickly and knocked on the half-open door. Ms. Blake? No answer. He pushed the door open. She was sitting on the floor next to the bed, which was not where he'd expected her to be. She'd changed into a t-shirt and pajama pants at some point. Quickly, he guessed. And now she was sitting with her back against the mattress and her eyes closed and her arms crossed loosely over her stomach. I sat down, she said without opening her eyes, and then I just stayed here. Did you hit anything? Just the floor. I'm fine. A pause. The floor is cold. Can you get up? She opened her eyes and considered this. Probably not my best work right now. He crouched down, took her arm carefully, and helped her up onto the edge of the mattress. She sat there for a moment, and then without any particular drama, she lay back and pulled the blanket over herself. He waited. After a few seconds, her breathing slowed. He pulled the blanket a little further up, turned off the bedside lamp, and left the room. He stood in the living room for a while, looking out at the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He should call a car. He should go home, get 4 hours of sleep, be there when Sophie woke up. He looked at the front door. He looked at the hallway that led to the bedroom. He was a stranger in this apartment. He had no business being here past the point of necessity. But the city was quiet and strange at this hour, and the couch was right there, and the idea of leaving a person alone who might not be fully okay, it just sat wrong with him. He set an alarm on his phone for 5:30. He took off his jacket, folded it over the arm of the couch. He lay down without taking off his shoes for a long moment, then thought about the upholstery and took them off and set them neatly by the coffee table. He stared at the ceiling, which was high and white, and said nothing useful. He thought about Sophie, the way she'd looked this morning eating cereal, the pink plastic spoon she still used even though she was 7 because it was her favorite and he'd never pushed her on it. He thought about the drive home, the city streets, the way the route from this building to his apartment was about 23 minutes with no traffic. He thought about the way Marcus had said she had a long night, the flat, unsentimental way Marcus said most things. He fell asleep without meaning to, with his dress shirt still on and one arm across his stomach, and the city glowing through the windows. He was awake by 5:15 before the alarm. The apartment was gray with early light. Nothing had changed in the night. The paintings on the walls, the long hallway, the closed door at the end of it. He sat up carefully, as though the sound of the couch might carry. He found a glass in one of the kitchen cabinets and filled it with water and set it on the coffee table with 2 of the aspirin from the small first aid kit in his jacket pocket, the kind he always carried because Sophie went through them during soccer season. He found a notepad near the kitchen counter that had the building's name embossed at the top, the kind hotels put in rooms. He picked up the pen next to it. He stood there for a second, the pen in his hand, and thought about what to write. He wrote, "I drove you home last night. You're okay. Liam, company driver." He looked at it. It seemed right. Not too much, not nothing. He put on his jacket. He put on his shoes, tying them quietly. He straightened the couch cushion. He let himself out, pulling the door until he heard the soft click of the lock. In the elevator, going down, he looked at his own reflection in the mirrored panel and thought he looked tired in the specific way of a man who hadn't slept enough, but had slept on purpose, for a reason. Jean was still at the door, different shift or a very long one. "Have a good morning," Jean said. "You too," Liam said. He walked to where the car was parked, got in, and drove home through the pale, almost morning streets. He made it back to his apartment with 40 minutes to spare before Sophie's alarm went off. He put on coffee. He stood in the kitchen and listened to the building's particular morning sounds, the pipes, the neighbor's television, a door somewhere above him. When Sophie patted in at 6:20 in her dinosaur socks and her tangled hair, he was sitting at the table with his coffee. "You're already dressed," she said, looking at him with the sharp, practical eyes she had developed for noticing things adults tried to hide. "Long night. Sit down. I'll make eggs." She climbed into her chair and pulled her knees up. "The good eggs or the fast eggs?" "What's the difference?" "The good eggs have cheese." "Then the good eggs," he said. And he got up and opened the refrigerator, and the apartment was warm, and the coffee was strong, and everything was fine. He found out about the photos at work. He had gone in the next afternoon for a scheduled pickup. One of the junior executives had a meeting across town, and he had barely gotten through the lobby before he felt it. The slight shift in the air when people know something about you that you don't know, they know. The way conversations in groups seem to adjust when you come through a door. He had experienced it once before, years ago, in a context he didn't like thinking about. He recognized it immediately. Carter. The dispatch coordinator, a thin man named Phil, who wore the same gray fleece every single day regardless of season, stopped him near the elevators. "You need to see HR before you do anything else." "I have a pickup at 2. Marcus is covering it. You need to see HR." Liam looked at him. Phil had the expression of a man delivering information he had been told to deliver and wanted to be done with. No particular judgment in it, just discomfort. "What happened?" Liam asked. Phil hesitated. "You should talk to HR." The HR office was on the 6th floor, a suite of beige carpeted rooms that smelled like fresh printer paper and old coffee. The woman who met him was named Karen Marsh, and she had the particular composure of someone who had spent 15 years delivering bad news in a measured voice and had learned to separate her face from the content. She gestured to a chair. He sat. She opened a folder, then seemed to decide against it and closed it again. Mr. Carter, are you aware that photographs were shared this morning on the company communication platform and on several public social media accounts? He looked at her. Photographs of what? Of you. A pause. And of Ms. Blake. Last night, at the building. Something settled in his stomach like cold water. I drove her home, he said. She needed help getting upstairs. I understand. That's what you're saying, yes. Careful phrasing. Not that's what happened. The photographs were taken from the building's exterior cameras, and from what appears to be a phone camera. They show you entering the building with Ms. Blake and going up in the elevator together. That's accurate. The issue, Mr. Carter, is how they're being presented. The posts accompanying these images have made certain, she paused, choosing, suggestions about the nature of your interaction. He was quiet for a moment. And Ms. Blake? He asked. Ms. Blake has not yet been briefed, as far as I know. A small pause. She has a board meeting this morning. He nodded once. Pending investigation? Karen Marsh said. And in line with company policy, we're placing you on administrative suspension with pay. This isn't a disciplinary action at this stage. It's a procedural step while we review the matter. Okay, he said. She looked at him slightly differently then, like she'd expected something more from him. Protest, maybe? Anger? Some kind of reaction that her training had prepared her for. You can take questions through your union rep or personal counsel if you'd prefer, she said. I don't have a union rep, and I can't afford a lawyer. He stood up. Is there anything else? No, we'll be in touch. He walked out of the office. He walked past the elevator, down the stairwell, through the side door of the building, and stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light with his hands in his pockets and the traffic moving past him like it always did, unconcerned, indifferent, going somewhere else. He took out his phone and looked at it for a moment without unlocking it. Then he called Mrs. Okafor. It's Liam. I'm going to be home earlier than expected today. Is Sophie okay? She's fine, baby. She's watching that show with the animals. Okay, tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. He put the phone away. He flagged a cab. His car was in the company lot, and he didn't know the protocol for that now, and sat in the back and watched the streets go by. He didn't look at social media. He had learned, somewhere along the way, that looking at the thing people were saying about you was almost never useful. It didn't change what happened. It just gave it weight. Sophie was curled on the couch with a blanket when he came in, which was her default position for anything that required sitting still. She looked up when he unlocked the door. You're early. Yeah. He put his keys on the hook. How was school? Boring. We did fractions. Fractions are useful. You always say that. She looked at him with that same sharp, uncanny attention she'd had since she was about 4 years old and had first started noticing that adults lied about being fine. What happened? Nothing you need to worry about. That's not a real answer. He sat down on the couch next to her, and she immediately shifted to lean against his arm, the way she did when she was being casual about needing contact. He didn't call attention to it. Work stuff, he said. I'm going to be home for a few days. Work stuff like getting fired? Not like getting fired, more like, he thought about how to say it. Sometimes at work, something happens that people get confused about, and it takes time to sort out. That's what's happening. I'm going to be home while it gets sorted. She was quiet for a moment, which with Sophie usually meant she was deciding whether to push. Did you do something wrong? No. Did someone say you did something wrong? He looked at her sideways. She was 7, and she already operated like a lawyer. Yes. But you didn't. No, I didn't. She nodded, once, as though that settled it. Then it'll get sorted, she said, and turned back to the television with the calm certainty of someone who had not yet learned to doubt her own read on people, and was, in this case, correct. He sat there beside her and let the room be quiet for a while. He made pasta for dinner. the kind Sophie called the twisty kind because she refused to learn the word fusilli on principle, and they ate at the small kitchen table while she told him about fractions and about a girl at school named B who had apparently decided that recess was most efficiently spent reorganizing the gravel by color. "That's a lot of work for recess," Liam said. "I helped," Sophie said. "Of course you did." She grinned and got sauce on her chin and didn't notice, and he handed her a napkin without comment. After dinner, she did her reading assignment, 15 minutes, timed on the microwave. And then it was bath time, and then the extended negotiation over how many books constituted bedtime reading, which ended, as it usually did, with 2.5 because Sophie was strategic about picking a long book as one of the two. When she was finally asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and his phone face down and the apartment quiet around him. He thought about what the next few days looked like. He had enough saved to cover 2 weeks of bills if the suspension stretched that long. Sophie's school had a field trip coming up that he'd already paid for. There were no catastrophes, not yet. He thought about the look on Karen Marsh's face when he had said okay and stood up without arguing. He wondered what that looked like from her side, whether it registered as guilt or as exhaustion or as something else. He thought about the photographs he hadn't seen and the stories built around them that he hadn't read, and the people at work who had read them and made up their minds, and how quickly and easily a story becomes a fact once enough people decide to believe it. He wasn't angry, exactly. He was tired in a specific way. The way you get tired when the world behaves badly and there's no particular surprise in it, just the weight of it. He turned his phone over and opened a message thread with no name, just a number. His sister in Cleveland, who he talked to maybe twice a month. He typed, "Having a weird week. Call me when you get a chance." He put the phone down. He thought about Vanessa Blake, who she was in that party room at midnight with her shoes off, the way she'd pressed her hand flat on the tablecloth. He wondered when she'd find out what was being said. He wondered what her first reaction would be. He didn't know her well enough to guess. He went to bed at 10:15 and lay in the dark for a while, listening to the sounds of his building, and somewhere in there he fell asleep. In the morning, Sophie made him draw a bird. It was her thing. She'd been going through a phase for 3 months where she wanted drawings, always specific, always with particular requirements. Today's bird was supposed to be blue, with a sad but not too sad face, and holding something she wasn't sure what yet. "Holding a cup of coffee?" he suggested. She looked at him gravely. "Birds don't drink coffee." "Some birds might." "Dad?" "Fine." He drew the bird without the coffee. It was not a good drawing. His art skills peaked somewhere around stick figures, but Sophie examined it with the seriousness of a curator and declared it pretty good for you, which was the highest praise she gave. He put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a watermelon. They had cereal, the good kind that was mostly sugar, which he allowed on days when he felt like the world owed them something small. Sophie ate and talked about the bird drawing and about Bee's gravel project, and about a TV show she wanted to watch that evening that was, she assured him, totally educational. He listened to her. He laughed where the laughing fit. He refilled her glass of orange juice. And outside, in the city that knew nothing about cereal or bird drawings or 7-year-olds who organized gravel, the story about him spread further and got louder and took on a shape that had nothing to do with what he had actually done. But inside this kitchen, in this particular morning, that was all still elsewhere. Inside this kitchen, the watermelon magnet held the drawing to the refrigerator, and the cereal was too sweet, and his daughter was describing a gravel-based organizational system in more detail than any subject had ever deserved. And it was, despite everything, a fine morning. He drank his coffee. He listened. He was still here. The suspension letter arrived by email on Thursday morning while Sophie was at school. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table with his second coffee of the day and a water bill he'd been meaning to sort through when his phone buzzed. He almost didn't open it. He'd been avoiding his work email the same way he'd been avoiding social media, on the principle that information you can't do anything about is just wait. But he saw the sender's name and opened it. "Dear Mr. Carter, this letter serves as formal notice of administrative suspension pending investigation into conduct violations as outlined in Section 4.2 of the Blake Industries Employee Code of Conduct. This suspension is effective immediately and will remain in place until the investigation has been concluded. You're asked to refrain from entering company premises and from contacting clients or colleagues during this period. HR will be in touch within 5 to 10 business days with further information. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the table and finished his coffee. The water bill was $47, which was about right for the month. He paid it online, put the bill in the recycling, and washed his mug. Boy. The thing about rumors is that they don't need to be true to do damage. They just need to be shareable. And in an office of 400 people with company-wide messaging and personal phones and too much downtime between meetings, shareable was never a problem. By Thursday afternoon, the story had a shape. Liam had driven the CEO home. Liam had gone upstairs. Liam had stayed the night. The photographs showed him entering the building with her leaning slightly toward him, his hand near her arm. And the footage was grainy enough and the hour late enough that it looked like whatever you wanted it to look like. And what most people wanted it to look like, it turned out, was a scandal. The version circulating on the company's internal Slack channels was restrained compared to what was spreading on the public side. Someone, no one knew who, or everyone claimed not to know, had screenshotted the lobby camera stills and posted them with commentary that started speculative and became declarative within about 6 hours. The driver and the boss. That was the phrase that got attached to it. Simple, clean, easy to share. There were people at Blake Industries who knew Liam Carter by name and face. The other drivers, the dispatch staff, a few of the junior executives who had ridden with him often enough to make small talk. Most of them fell into one of two categories: those who said nothing publicly and assumed the worst privately, and those who said something publicly and assumed the worst loudly. There was a third category, smaller, quieter, who thought it didn't sound right, who had ridden with Liam Carter and found him to be the kind of man who kept both hands on the wheel and didn't say anything about his personal life unless you pulled it out of him. But that category doesn't make for good posts. Marcus, who had been driving for Blake Industries for 11 years and had the particular immunity of someone too senior to fire easily, told the dispatch manager directly. I sent him up there. He was doing his job. The dispatch manager wrote it down and said they'd note it for the investigation. Marcus said, "Yeah, I know how that goes," and went back to his route. None of this reached Liam because he wasn't in the building and he wasn't on the messaging platform, and his phone was only receiving calls from Sophie's school, his sister, and Mrs. Okafor. His sister called on Thursday evening. "Okay," she said when he answered. "What's going on?" Her name was Donna, and she was 35, and she worked in hospital administration in Cleveland, and she had the particular directness of someone who dealt with paperwork and bad news for a living and had no patience for the long way around. "Work situation," he said. "Something got misread." "How misread?" He told her. The party, the drive, the penthouse, the couch, the note he'd left. He told her about the photographs and the suspension and Karen Marsh's careful, neutral face. Dana was quiet for a moment. He could hear the television in her apartment, something with a laugh track that she muted. "And you haven't said anything?" she asked. "To anyone?" "What would I say? The truth? That you drove her home and slept on the couch like a normal, decent person? That sounds defensive. That's because you're being accused of something." "I know." He shifted the phone to his other ear. "But if I go out there and start saying I didn't do anything, that just adds to the noise. It makes it look like there's something to defend against." "There is something to defend against, Liam." "I know." "You can't just—" She stopped. He heard her exhale, the particular sigh she used when she knew she couldn't win an argument but hadn't given up trying. "You've always done this. You just go quiet and wait and assume things will sort themselves out." "Sometimes they do. And sometimes they don't." He looked at the wall above the kitchen counter where Sophie had taped a drawing she'd done last week. A house with lopsided windows and a very confident sun in the corner. "I'm handling it, Dana. By doing nothing. By not making it worse." She was quiet for a longer moment this time. "How's Sophie?" "She's good. She helped some kid organize gravel by color at recess this week." "That sounds like her." A pause. "Liam." "Yeah." "You know you can come here if things get bad. You and Sophie both. You know that." "I know," he said. "It won't come to that." He hoped that was true. Bullchum. Vanessa Blake found out on Friday morning, which was later than it should have been, because her assistant had been managing her calendar and her communications and the particular chaos of a board week, and had decided, in a judgment call that would cost her significantly, that her boss did not need to be shown a social media thread about a company driver in the middle of a governance presentation. Vanessa found it herself. She was in the back of a car, a different driver, someone she didn't recognize, heading from the board meeting to her offices when she opened the company app to check whether the quarterly figures had been updated and saw, in the general announcements channel that she almost never looked at, a message from the HR department reminding staff of the confidentiality provisions in their employment contracts in relation to any ongoing personnel investigations. It was the kind of message that told you nothing and implied everything. She typed a 3-word message to her assistant. "What did I miss?" The response took 4 minutes, which was long for her assistant, who typically responded in under 90 seconds. What came back was not a summary, it was a screenshot. Then another. Then a link to a thread on a public platform with a subject line that made something cold move through her chest. She read it. She kept her face still because the driver was in the front, and she had learned years ago to manage her expressions in the backs of cars. But she read all of it. The posts, the comments, the photograph of herself leaning against Liam Carter in the lobby of her building, his hand near her elbow, both of them caught in the greenish light of the exterior camera. She recognized the moment. She remembered it dimly. The curb, the misjudged step, his hand there before she had even registered falling. She had thought nothing of it in the moment. In the photograph, it looked like something entirely different. She put her phone down and looked out the window at the city going past. She felt, in order, embarrassment, then anger, then a specific cold clarity that she knew better than to act on immediately. The embarrassment was for herself, for drinking that much, for being in a position where she needed help getting home, for being the kind of photograph that people attached narratives to. She was 30 years old and had run a company worth $11 billion for 4 years, and there were still people who were waiting for the moment they could reduce her to something smaller, and here was the photograph handing them the material. The anger was harder to locate. It was at the people who posted it, yes, at whoever had taken the camera stills and decided to share them, at the employees who had passed it around like currency, at herself, a little, for not having been more careful. And somewhere in there, threaded through the rest, was something directed at a situation that had made an innocent man into a scandal through no fault of his own. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "I need the security footage from my building, Sunday night through Monday morning, all of it." From the building management? From Gene, if he has access, or from building security directly. "Tell them it's my building and I want the footage." "Okay. Anything else?" "The driver, Carter. What's his status?" A brief pause. "He's on suspension pending investigation. HR initiated it Wednesday." "On what basis?" "Conduct review, standard procedure for—" "I know what standard procedure is." She took a breath. "Don't do anything with that yet. Just get me the footage." She put the phone in her bag. The car was pulling up to the building now. The driver said, "Here you are, Ms. Blake," and she thanked him, which she always did, and got out. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going in. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of cold that gets into your coat rather than sitting on top of it. She stood there just long enough to remind herself that she was not going to react to this before she understood it. Then she went inside. The next 2 days were the kind that felt longer than they were. Liam fell into a routine that was partly practical and partly self-protective, the kind of structure that keeps you from spending too much time inside your own head. He got Sophie to school in the mornings. He came home and cleaned the apartment, not because it needed it, but because cleaning was a task with a clear endpoint. He cooked actual meals, the kind he usually didn't have time for. Soups that needed to simmer, a chicken thing with vegetables that Sophie declared not bad, which was her equivalent of a standing ovation. He called his bank, he reviewed his savings. He did the math on how long he could manage if the suspension turned into termination, and the math was uncomfortable but not catastrophic. 2 months, maybe 3 if he was careful. He had driven for other companies before. He could do it again. He didn't let himself think past that, because past that was a version of things that hadn't happened yet. Friday afternoon, he took Sophie to the park because the weather had broken briefly into something warmer than expected, and she had been inside for too many consecutive days. She brought her soccer ball and they kicked it around on the grass, badly on his side, and with surprising precision on hers. She had her mother's coordination and none of Liam's, which was a straightforward blessing. She didn't ask again about work. That was the thing about Sophie. Once she'd gotten an answer she accepted, she didn't pull at the thread. She accepted his explanation with the same trust she applied to most things that came from him, which was the kind of trust that felt, some days, like the most significant responsibility he had. They stayed at the park until the light got thin and the temperature dropped. Walking back, Sophie's ball tucked under her arm. She slipped her hand into his without announcement, the way she did when she wanted contact and had decided the casual approach was more efficient than asking for it. He held her hand the whole way home. That same Friday, in a conference room on the 17th floor of the Blake Industries building, 3 people were having a conversation that Liam knew nothing about. One was Karen Marsh from HR. One was Derek Cole, the senior vice president of operations, who had been at the company for 7 years and had a reputation for solving problems quickly and not always carefully. The third was Vanessa Blake's personal assistant, Priya, who had been asked to sit in and take notes, and was doing so with the focused expression of someone who understood that notes in a room like this were their own kind of power. "The position is straightforward," Derek Cole was saying. He had the confidence of a man who is used to rooms following his lead. "We have an employee on suspension. We have documented public complaints from 3 senior staff members who feel the situation creates a hostile environment. The cleanest outcome is a severance agreement with a standard NDA and a 2-week pay package." Karen Marsh had her folder open on the table. "We don't have completed investigation findings yet. Terminating before that's done creates exposure. The investigation is a formality. The photographs are in the public domain. The reputational damage is already done. Yes, to the company, not just the individual. Every day this stays unresolved is another day it stays in the conversation." "We also don't have any evidence of actual misconduct," Karen said. "He drove her home. He went upstairs to make sure she got in safely. That's within the scope of his role." "The problem isn't what he did," Derek said. "The problem is how it looks, and how it looks is a problem for the company." Priya wrote, DC, optics over facts. She underlined it once, lightly, and didn't change her expression. "What does Ms. Blake want?" Karen asked. "Ms. Blake is reviewing the situation," Derek said, which was the kind of answer that meant he hadn't asked her. Given the board week and everything on her plate, it makes sense for operations to handle this at our level. "This is a personnel matter related to the CEO's personal circumstances," Karen said carefully. "It seems like she should be consulted." "She will be. Once we have a recommendation." Karen looked at him for a moment. She looked down at her folder. She was 44 years old and had been in HR for 19 years, and she had been in rooms like this before, and she knew the shape of what was happening here. "I want to note for the record," she said, "that I don't think we have sufficient grounds for termination at this stage." Derek Cole picked up his pen. "Noted," he said, in the tone of someone who had already decided. Saturday morning, Liam got a text from a number he didn't have saved. It took him a moment to work out who it was. The area code was local, but the formality of the language narrowed it down. "This is Jean, from the building at 220 Park East. I wanted to let you know that Ms. Blake requested the security footage from Monday morning. I provided it. I thought you should know." He read it twice. He typed back, "Thank you for telling me." Then he sat with it for a while. He didn't know what it meant, whether Vanessa Blake was reviewing the footage to protect herself, to understand what happened, or for some other reason he couldn't anticipate. He didn't know her well enough to guess her motivations. He only knew what he had done and what the footage would show, which were the same thing. What he felt, reading that text, was not quite relief. It was something smaller and more fragile than that. The sense that somewhere, the actual sequence of events was being looked at by someone who had the ability to verify it. Whether that led anywhere was a different question. He put the phone in his pocket and went to make Sophie's breakfast. Vanessa Blake watched the footage 3 times. The first time, she watched it straight through. The exterior cameras, the lobby, the elevator. Liam steadying her at the curb, the walk inside, the elevator where she stood with her eyes closed for 2 floors, and he stood on the other side of the panel and looked at the numbers. Jean opening the lobby door with that assessing look. The timestamp on the elevator showing they reached her floor at 12:41 in the morning. Then the interior footage, which the building system kept for 72 hours. The penthouse hallway, her apartment's front door opening, both of them going in. The timestamp advancing. No other movement in the hallway until 5:48 in the morning, when the door opened again and Liam Carter came out alone. Jacket on, tie loosened. He paused in the hallway for a second, rolled his shoulders once, and walked to the elevator. She watched that part again. The pause, the shoulder roll. The look of a man who had slept in his clothes and was working out the stiffness. She watched it a third time and made herself look at it without the emotion, the way she reviewed quarterly reports, looking for what was actually there rather than what she expected. What was actually there was a man who had done exactly what she had a dim, fragmentary memory of, helped her home, made sure she was okay, stayed because leaving felt wrong, and left in the morning without making it into anything. The note on the coffee table that she'd found when she came out at 7:30, written on the building's embossed notepad. I drove you home last night. You're okay. Liam. She had assumed, in the fog of that morning and the pressure of the board week, that it had been Jean. She hadn't thought about it past that. She closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of her home office for a while. Outside, the city moved and hummed like it always did. She could hear it faintly through the windows, the deep, persistent sound of a place that didn't stop for anything. She had always found it steadying. Tonight it just sounded like noise. She thought about the thread she'd read in the car, the comments, the photograph with the caption someone had written, 5 words that had turned a moment of basic human decency into something prurient and small. She thought about the 400 people in her company who had read it and forwarded it and added their own commentary. She thought about Karen Marsh's email that had arrived Friday evening, flagging that a senior vice president had been moving toward a severance recommendation, and the careful, neutral language Karen used to convey that she had objections but was uncertain how far to push them. She thought about Liam Carter on suspension, sitting somewhere in this city while the story about him spread further. She pulled up his employment file. The photograph was a standard ID-style picture, slightly overexposed, the way they always were. And he was looking at the camera with an expression that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't unfriendly. His record was clean. 3 years with the company, no complaints, no incidents, 2 commendation notes from senior executives, 1 for handling a scheduling emergency during a conference week, and 1 for, she looked at this one twice, returning a passenger's laptop that had been left in the car, driving it back across town to deliver it personally when the passenger had already left for the day. She set the file down. She picked up her phone and sent 3 messages. 1 to Priya. Clear my Monday morning through noon. 1 to Karen Marsh. No severance, no termination. Hold everything until I get there. And 1 to Derek Cole, which was shorter than the other 2. Stand down. Then she put the phone on the desk and went to the kitchen and made tea, because she needed something to do with her hands while she thought through what came next. The kettle was too loud and the kitchen was too bright, and she stood at the counter and waited for the water to boil, and thought about the note on the coffee table and the footage and the smear of mascara she'd found on her face in the bathroom mirror Monday morning, and how none of those things had anything to do with the story being told about them. The water boiled. She poured it. She stood there a while longer in the quiet kitchen, 22 floors above a city that was busy making up its mind about a man who had just made sure she got home safe. She drank her tea. She thought. She didn't rush it. Sunday was the last day Liam let himself do nothing. He had always been practical about grief and setbacks. He didn't believe in wallowing, not because he thought it was weak, but because it was unproductive, and he had a daughter who needed him functional. He gave himself the weekend and told himself that on Monday he would start making calls, other driving services, contacts from his previous job, anyone who might have something. He wasn't going to wait on Blake Industries indefinitely. But Sunday he let himself be slow. He and Sophie made pancakes, the kind with too much butter that she insisted were better than the correct amount of butter, and they ate them at the table with the radio on low. She talked about a book she was reading, something with dragons that she had already decided was the best book she'd ever read, which was what she said about most books she was currently reading. Better than the last one? He asked. Completely different category. she said seriously. You can't compare them. That's like comparing apples and, she thought, other apples. That's exactly the same thing. No, because these are different kinds of apples. He looked at her. That argument doesn't hold up. Yes, it does. She took a large bite of pancake, which he understood to mean the discussion was closed. He cleared the plates. He washed them. He dried them and put them back in the cabinet. He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below. It was a gray, damp Sunday, the kind that seemed designed for staying inside. A woman walked a dog past the building. A delivery truck was double parked 2 doors down. Everything was ordinary and specific and real, and he held on to that. Whatever was happening in the offices of Blake Industries, whatever was being said on screens he wasn't looking at, that was a different world, operating on its own logic, moving toward whatever it was going to move toward. He couldn't speed it up. He could only stay in this kitchen, in this apartment, being the person his daughter understood him to be. He turned from the window. Sophie had left the table and was on the couch with her dragon book, already 3 pages in, her feet tucked under her with the automatic ease of someone who had always known this couch was hers. He sat down in the armchair across from her. He picked up a book he'd been meaning to read for 4 months and opened it to the first page. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, it was quiet and warm and his. That would have to be enough, for now. Monday arrived the way bad weeks tend to. Without ceremony, just continuation. Liam was up before Sophie, which was normal, and had coffee made and her lunch packed before 7, which was also normal, and was sitting at the kitchen table with his phone open to a job listing site when the first call came in. It was a number he didn't recognize, a local area code, and he almost didn't answer it. He answered it. "Is this Liam Carter?" A man's voice, younger than he expected, with the slightly breathless quality of someone who had been told to make a call quickly. "Who's asking?" "My name is Ryan Hooper. I'm a reporter with the—" Liam ended the call. He put the phone face down on the table. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the wall. The phone buzzed again. Same number. He let it ring out. Then a different number. Then a third. By the time Sophie came into the kitchen in her dinosaur socks, rubbing one eye with her fist, he had declined 4 calls and his coffee had gone cold. "Why is your phone buzzing so much?" she asked. "Wrong numbers," he said. "Sit down. I'll pour your cereal." But he didn't look at what was being said until Sophie was on the school bus and he was back in the apartment with the door locked and the kind of silence that has a weight to it. He sat on the couch and opened his browser, and for the first time since all of this started, he read it. It was worse than he'd expected, which he supposed was always how these things went. The original photographs had been shared far enough that they'd been picked up by 2 local gossip accounts with real followings, the kind that covered corporate drama and celebrity-adjacent stories, and knew exactly how to frame an image for maximum implication. The narrative had been cleaned up and sharpened in the process of being retold. Details that hadn't been in the original posts had appeared, presented with the confidence of fact. Sources close to the situation, insiders say, multiple employees confirmed. None of it was attributed to anyone who would put their name on it. Someone, and he couldn't tell if it was one person or several, had gotten a hold of his employee photo from somewhere, the same one he'd seen in his file that time HR had him fill out a form. It was being used in posts now, attached to the story, his face next to screenshots of the lobby photographs. His name, his job title. 3 years of his life reduced to a caption under a grainy camera still. He sat there for a long time, reading. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He wasn't sure what he was doing, actually. Maybe just making himself look at it directly, the way you sometimes have to look at a wound to understand how bad it is. Some of the comments were vicious in that particular way of people who feel safe behind distance and anonymity. Some were just thoughtless, the social media equivalent of a shrug. Yeah, that's sketchy, or knew something was off at that company. A few were skeptical, saying the story didn't add up, but those were buried under the weight of the rest. He found, near the bottom of one thread, a comment from a username he didn't recognize that said, "The driver has a kid, single dad. Hope they at least waited until they found out the facts." He stared at that one for a moment. He didn't know if that person knew who he was, or if it was a guess. He didn't know how much further that particular detail had spread. He closed the browser. He set the phone on the cushion next to him and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly, the way he did when something was bad and getting worse, and there was nothing to do about it except keep breathing. The thing that kept surfacing wasn't the anger, though that was there, a low burn under everything. It was the specific helplessness of being reduced, being made into a version of yourself that you didn't recognize and couldn't argue with, because arguing required a platform, and a platform required being heard, and the story had already filled every available space before he got there. He had been careful his whole adult life, careful about the places he put himself, the people he trusted, the lines he was clear about never crossing. He had been careful the night of the party, careful going up to that penthouse, careful where he stood and what he touched and how he left. He had done everything right. And it had not mattered, not even slightly, because the story wasn't about what he'd done. It was about what a photograph of him could be made to mean. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Karen Marsh. Mr. Carter, please be advised that the investigation remains ongoing. We will be in contact by end of week with next steps. If you have been contacted by media, please do not make public statements. Our legal team has forwarded guidance to your registered email. He read it. He put the phone down. He thought, end of week could mean Thursday, or it could mean Friday, or it could mean they were buying time they didn't know how to fill. He went to the window and looked out at the street. A man was sitting on the front steps of the building across the way, eating a sandwich, reading something on his phone, completely ordinary. A kid rode past on a bike that was slightly too big for him. The delivery truck from yesterday was back, or a different one. They all looked the same. The world kept going, unconcerned. He got up, put on his jacket, and went for a walk. He walked for almost 2 hours, which was longer than he planned, but shorter than it felt. He walked without a destination, which was something he almost never did. He was a point A to point B person, by habit and profession. But today he needed the movement more than the direction. He walked through the neighborhood he'd lived in for 5 years, past the diner where he and Sophie got breakfast on Saturdays when the weather was good, past the community center where she'd done a summer program last year, past the hardware store where a man named Walt had once spent 40 minutes helping him figure out why his kitchen faucet was dripping and refused to charge him for the advice. He thought about what Dana had said on the phone. You just go quiet and wait and assume things will sort themselves out. He thought about the fact that she wasn't entirely wrong. He had a habit of stillness that had served him sometimes and failed him others. He had been still through things he should have fought harder. He had been still when Sophie's mother left, too stunned and too proud to ask her to reconsider, and he had spent the next year realizing that sometimes staying quiet looks exactly like consent. He didn't want to make that mistake twice. But the problem was that he didn't have a way in. He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have a platform. He didn't have a relationship with Vanessa Blake that was anything more than peripheral. He had the truth, which was a real thing, but not always a powerful one. He bought a coffee from a cart on the corner of a street he didn't usually walk on and stood there drinking it while the traffic moved past. The coffee was bad, too burnt, too much sugar, and he drank it anyway because he was cold and it was hot. His phone buzzed. He took it out. The message was from a number he had stored as building, Jean. Mr. Carter, I thought you should know. A woman from a news website came by this morning asking questions at the front desk. I told her nothing, but she may try other staff. Wanted you to be aware. He typed back, Thank you, Jean. I appreciate it. He stood there for a moment, coffee in hand, and thought about Jean, the doorman who had looked at him in that long, assessing way the night of the party and then stepped aside. The doorman who had texted him about the footage. He didn't know what Jean's read on things was, why he kept passing information along. But he was grateful for it in the way you're grateful for unexpected kindness when you've been running low. He finished the bad coffee and started walking back. Inside the Blake Industries building that same morning, things were moving in ways that Liam had no way of knowing about. Vanessa's Monday had started at 7, which was standard. She was in the office before most of her senior team, which was also standard. She had a habit of arriving early enough to have an hour before the building filled up. An hour she used for the thinking that didn't fit into meetings. She liked the building when it was quiet. She liked her office when it was just her and the city outside the window. This morning she had spent that hour not thinking about quarterly projections. She had spent it thinking about what she was going to do and in what order she was going to do it. By 9, she had asked Priya to pull together the complete record of everything that had been posted and shared internally. The Slack messages, the forwarded screenshots, the comments from named employees who had added their voices to the pile. She had read through it with the same attention she gave to financial filings, looking for what was actually there. What was actually there was a company full of people who had decided collectively, with very little friction, to believe the worst about one of their own employees. There had been no moment of pause. No one in a position of authority had said, "Wait." The story had moved because people let it move, because moving it was easier and more interesting than stopping it. That made her angry in a way that surprised her with its clarity. She had expected to feel, she wasn't sure. Embarrassed, maybe. Implicated. The way you feel when something happens adjacent to you that reflects badly. But instead she felt something closer to fury, the cold and specific kind that comes when you see clearly what went wrong and who let it. Derek Cole arrived at 9:15. He came into her office with his usual measured confidence, the walk of a man who was used to solving problems before they reached her level. "Vanessa." He sat down across from her. "I wanted to loop you in on the Carter situation before—" "I've read your recommendation," she said. "Good. I think the cleanest outcome here is—" "I said I've read it." She kept her voice level. "I'm not going to implement it." He paused. The slight recalibration of someone who expected agreement. The reputational exposure for the company is being managed by people sharing doctored narratives and building a story out of a lobby photograph, she said. That's the reputational exposure, not the driver. He was quiet for a moment. The investigation will close when I say it closes. And it will close with Carter returning to his position. I've reviewed the security footage. There's nothing there. Derek Cole looked at her with the expression of a man deciding whether to push. He had worked for her long enough to read the temperature correctly most of the time. "You're sure about this?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm sure about what the footage shows," she said, "and I'm sure that we suspended an employee based on a rumor and a photograph, without investigation findings. And I'd like to know who greenlit that." A short silence. "That was a judgment call based on— It was a mistake," she said, "and we're going to correct it." She picked up her pen. "I'm scheduling a company-wide meeting for Friday. I want it in the large conference facility, all staff. And I want the full unedited footage prepared for presentation." He looked at her. "Vanessa, showing that footage company-wide is necessary," she said. "It will invite questions about your personal—" "It will answer them," she said. "Which is the point." She looked at him steadily. "We built this company on the idea that people here are treated fairly. That means something, or it doesn't. It doesn't mean something selectively, when it's easy." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, not because he agreed, she suspected, but because he understood that the conversation was done. "Friday," he said, 9 a.m., all staff." He left. She sat still for a moment after the door closed, then turned to her window and the city beyond it. She thought about the note on the coffee table. "I drove you home last night. You're okay." She thought about how little that had cost him to write and how much it now seemed to represent, the simple, uncomplicated intention of it. Not managing a situation, not calculating the benefit. Just, "You're okay." She pulled up his employee record again. She looked at the commendation for driving the laptop back across town. She looked at the 3 years of clean record. She looked at his photograph, the not-quite smile. She picked up her phone and called Priya. "I need Carter's direct contact number, and I need it kept quiet, just between us for now." Liam was back in his apartment by noon, eating a sandwich he'd made without much thought. Whatever was in the refrigerator assembled into something that counted as lunch, when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Not a reporter's breathless voice this time. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Mr. Carter." The voice was calm, measured, and familiar in the way that a voice can be familiar before you've placed it. The tone of it, the particular weight of the consonants. "This is Vanessa Blake." He put down his sandwich. "Ms. Blake," he said. I want to say something and I want to say it directly. A brief pause. I've reviewed the footage from my building, all of it. I know what you did and I know what you didn't do, and I'm sorry it took me this long to get there. He didn't say anything immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. I also want you to know, she continued, that the suspension is being reversed. You'll receive confirmation from HR today. I'm asking that you come in Friday morning for a company-wide meeting. I know that's a lot to ask given the week you've had. What kind of meeting? He asked. The kind that corrects the record. A pause. In front of everyone. He stood up from the table without quite meaning to. He walked to the window, the same window he'd stood at for the last 3 days. The street outside was doing what it always did. I want to be clear, he said. I don't need a public. I know you don't, she said. That's not why I'm doing it. A brief silence. The people at this company made a decision about who you were without a single fact to support it. They spread that decision until it reached the outside. That's a problem that belongs to me as much as anyone else, and I'm going to fix it, whether or not you need it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a kid was riding that too big bike again, or maybe a different kid on a different bike. He couldn't tell from here. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes? The night of the party, do you remember any of it? A pause that was slightly longer than the others. Parts of it. The elevator, the floor. Another pause. The blanket. I know, she said. I know you didn't. Something in her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but less armored. I found the note. He leaned against the window frame. The glass was cold through his shirt. I didn't know what else to leave. It was enough, she said. The line was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind after something has been said and both people need a second. Friday at 9, she said. You'll have a badge waiting at the front desk. A pause. Bring your daughter if she wants to come. I hear she's good with gravel. He blinked. How do you? I'm a CEO. I know things. And he could hear it now. The small, dry thing that wasn't quite a laugh but functioned like one. I'll see you Friday, Mr. Carter. The call ended. He stood at the window for a long time after that, phone in hand, looking at the street that was the same as it had always been. The delivery truck, the kid's bike, the ordinary, unremarkable flow of a Tuesday in a city that had never paused once on his behalf. He didn't tell Sophie about the call, not the details of it. He told her that things were getting sorted, which was what he'd said before. Except this time he said it differently, with less maintenance and more actual belief. She looked at him with that uncanny assessment of hers and seemed to register the difference. Sorted like all the way sorted? She asked. Not yet, but moving in the right direction. She accepted this. She went back to her dragon book. Tuesday passed and Wednesday passed in the altered rhythm of a man waiting for something that was no longer a threat but hadn't become good news yet. He started making real plans again, allowed himself to think past the end of the week, to think about the route back to normal. He called Donna and told her the situation had changed. She said, I told you things sort themselves out. And he said, that's not what you said. And she said, I said it eventually. And they talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which was its own kind of comfort. He cooked. He took Sophie to the park again. He finished the book he'd started on Sunday and started a new one, which felt like a small, specific act of optimism. On Wednesday night, Sophie was in the bath and he was folding laundry on his bed when his phone showed a news alert. He almost skipped past it. He'd been avoiding news the same way he'd been avoiding social media, but the subject line stopped him. Blake Industries CEO expected to address driver controversy at all-staff meeting Friday. He clicked it. The article was short and based on what appeared to be a leak from inside the company. Someone who knew the meeting was scheduled and had told someone who told someone else. The reporting was speculative, but the core of it was right. Vanessa Blake was holding a company-wide meeting. The agenda included the controversy surrounding an unnamed employee, and sources indicated she would present security footage. The comments section had already started. He looked at it for 1 second and then closed the app. He went back to folding laundry. Socks first because Sophie's were easy. She had a collection that ran to bright colors and cartoon animals, patterned in a way that made matching them a very low-stakes puzzle. He folded them into pairs and set them in a stack and moved on to his own shirts. Sophie called from the bathroom. "Dad, the shampoo ran out. There's a backup under the sink." A pause. "Where under the sink?" "Behind the cleaning stuff." A longer pause. "I see cleaning stuff." "Behind it, Soph." "Oh yeah, got it." He put the last shirt on the pile. He moved to the window and looked out at the city in the dark. The lights, the indifferent movement of traffic, the buildings full of people living their own Tuesdays and Wednesdays and impossible to explain weeks. Thursday. Liam got Sophie to school early, which he never did, and which she found deeply suspicious. "Why are we early?" she demanded on the steps. "I had a good morning." She looked at him. "You're not wearing your good jacket." "My good jacket is at the dry cleaner." "Why?" "Because I have a meeting tomorrow." She seemed to weigh this. "Important meeting?" "Yeah." She looked at him a moment longer in that way she had, like she was reading something written on him that he didn't know was there. Then she nodded once, the way she did when she decided something satisfied her, and turned and ran up the school steps with her backpack bouncing behind her. He stood there until she was inside. He stood there a little longer than necessary, if he was honest, just looking at the door she'd gone through. The ordinary school door with the dented push bar and the sign that said, "Visitors must sign in." Then he turned and walked back toward the subway, hands in his pockets, moving through the morning like a man who had somewhere to be. Bet. Thursday afternoon, someone posted a video. Liam found out about it because Dana texted him. "Are you aware there's a video circulating? Not a good one. Call me." He called her. "What video?" he said. "Someone inside the company got footage of you in the lobby from a different angle than the original photographs. I don't know how, but it's been edited, cut together with the original photos and some audio that's supposed to be... They're saying it's audio from inside the elevator." "There's no..." He stopped. "There's no audio from inside the elevator. The building doesn't record audio." "I know, but people don't know that, and the clip has sound. It's muffled, but it sounds like a man and a woman's voice, and there's music under it, and whoever put it together made it sound..." She paused. "It doesn't sound like what actually happened." He sat down on the couch. "How far has it spread?" he asked. "Far. It's been up for 3 hours." He closed his eyes for a second. "Okay." "Okay. Liam, okay. I hear you." He pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Friday's still happening. Vanessa Blake is doing the meeting. She has the real footage. Whatever this is, it's..." "Someone inside the company made this," Dana said. "That's not a random troll. Someone at Blake Industries put it together and pushed it out the night before the meeting that's going to clear your name. That's not an accident." He sat with that. "The shape of it. The specific timing of it?" "No," he said. "It's not." "You need to tell her." "She's going to find out." "Tell her yourself, tonight." He looked at his phone. He thought about the conversation on Tuesday. Vanessa Blake's voice. The particular quality of it when she'd said, "I know you didn't." The certainty of it. "I'll handle it," he said. "You always say that." "And I usually do." "Liam." "Dana." He took a breath. "Go eat dinner. I'll call you tomorrow." He sat on the couch for a while after the call, not moving. The apartment was quiet. Sophie wouldn't be home for another hour. The city moved outside the windows, unhurried, indifferent, moving at its own pace regardless of what any individual person needed from it. He picked up his phone. He found the number from Tuesday. He pressed call. It rang twice. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was the same, measured, alert, present. "I think you need to see something," he said. "Before tomorrow." A pause. "Not long." "Send it to me." "I don't have the link." "I haven't watched it. My sister told me about it, but it's circulating as of this afternoon. Edited footage and fabricated audio from the night of the party. Someone put it together inside the company." Silence for a moment. "Someone who knew the meeting was scheduled," she said. "Yeah." Another pause. This one had a different texture. The pause of a person who has just confirmed something they suspected. "I see." Her voice had not changed in pitch or pace, but something in the air of it had tightened. "Thank you for telling me." "Ms. Blake." He hesitated. If this changes things for Friday, it doesn't change things for Friday, she said. It changes what happens in the room Friday. That's different. A brief silence. Get some rest, Mr. Carter. The call ended. He set the phone on the cushion beside him. He leaned his head back against the couch and looked at the ceiling, the familiar pattern of the plaster he'd stared at for 3 years. The small imperfection near the light fixture that looked like a running dog if you were tired enough. He thought about the shape of the last week, the photographs and the rumors and the suspension letter and the reporters and the bad coffee on the street corner and Dana's sigh and Sophie's gravel organizing certainty and the note on an embossed notepad that had said, "You're okay," and been enough. He thought about what someone inside that building had done today, the careful, deliberate act of making something worse the night before it was going to be fixed, the kind of move that took intention, the kind that told you exactly what was at stake for the person making it. Tomorrow was going to be a hard room to walk into. He was going to walk into it anyway. He sat up, straightened, and went to start dinner because Sophie was due home and she would need to eat, and the chicken thing with the vegetables was still in the fridge from 2 days ago and needed to be used. He turned on the stove. The burner clicked 3 times before catching, the way it always did. He found a pan. He found the oil. He started from the beginning, the way you do when there's nothing else for it. One step, then the next, then the one after that. He didn't sleep well Thursday night. Not badly, exactly. He wasn't lying awake in a cold sweat, which was what he'd half expected. It was more the shallow, interrupted sleep of a man whose brain refused to fully disengage, cycling through half-formed thoughts and waking him every hour or so to confirm that yes, it was still dark, and yes, tomorrow was still coming. He lay there listening to the building's familiar sounds. The pipes, the elevator's distant mechanical hum, a door somewhere on the floor above that someone used a lot in the early morning hours. And at some point around 4:30, he gave up and went to the kitchen. He made coffee. He sat at the table. He did not look at his phone. He thought about the last time he'd walked into a room where people had already decided who he was. He was 24 and it had been a different context. A custody hearing, actually, 2 months after Sophie's mother had left and the situation had not yet clarified into the arrangement that eventually stuck. He remembered sitting outside the courtroom on a wooden bench with his hands folded on his knees, wearing a suit that he'd borrowed because his own didn't fit right anymore, and feeling the specific terror of being evaluated, of knowing that what happened in the next 2 hours would shape the next 10 years. He had walked in anyway. He had answered the questions directly and without performance. He had brought documentation because the lawyer he couldn't quite afford had told him to bring documentation. He had gotten Sophie. He thought about that now. Not as reassurance, exactly, but as a kind of evidence. He had been in rooms that mattered before. He had come out the other side. The coffee was strong and too hot, and he drank it carefully. By 5:30 he had showered and was standing in front of his closet, which was where the practical reality of the morning arrived. His good jacket was at the dry cleaner, as he'd told Sophie. He had a dark gray suit he wore for occasions that required actual presentation, Sophie's school events, the one time he'd been asked to cover a corporate function where they'd specified dress code. He took it out and looked at it. It was fine. It was not remarkable. It was clean and it fit and it was the best thing he had, and that was going to have to be enough. He ironed the shirt by memory. He had owned this iron for 4 years and understood its particular hot spot near the collar, and he dressed in the quiet of the bedroom while Sophie was still asleep. When he looked in the bathroom mirror, he looked like himself, which was the honest assessment. Tired around the eyes, dressed for something serious, not quite sure what face to put on for it. He went with his regular face. It was the only one he had practiced. Sophie was up by 7, and she noticed the suit immediately. "You're really going to the meeting," she said from her bedroom doorway, still holding her blanket around her shoulders. "I told you I was." She looked at him with the gravity of someone assessing a situation. "Are you nervous?" "A little." She seemed to appreciate the honesty. She came to the kitchen and sat down and watched him pour her cereal with the same attention she usually gave to important things. Then she said, "You know how sometimes in my class someone says something mean about someone and it turns out to be not true?" "Yeah." "And then the teacher makes them say so in front of everyone?" "Yeah." "That's what's happening today," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her. Something like that. She nodded, satisfied, and started eating her cereal. Then, after a moment with the spoon raised halfway, the person who said it feels bad after, when the teacher makes them say so. Usually, he agreed. Good, she said, and went back to her cereal with a finality that made it clear she considered the matter settled. He watched her eat and thought, not for the first time, that she was the most grounding thing in his life. The building looked the same as it always had. He had expected something to feel different about approaching the Blake Industries Tower on a Friday morning after the week that had happened. But the building was just a building. Glass and steel and the revolving door that had always needed a half-second more push than seemed reasonable. He came in at 8:45 and gave his name at the front desk, and the woman there checked a list, found him, printed a visitor badge without comment or expression, and handed it over. He clipped it to his jacket. He took the elevator to the main conference level on the third floor, which had a lobby area where people were already gathered. Staff from various departments, some holding coffee cups, standing in the particular configuration of people who have been told to be somewhere and are doing that while also trying to figure out what it means. Some of them he recognized. A few looked at him and looked away quickly. One or two held his gaze for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. Marcus was near the wall by the water station. He crossed to him. Carter. Marcus's face was unreadable in the way it usually was, but he extended his hand and they shook, and that meant something. How's the week been? Liam asked. Weird, Marcus said. People have been real chatty. Good chatty or bad chatty? The kind where you can tell they're trying to figure out if they're in trouble. Marcus looked around the room briefly. Which they might be. Word got around yesterday that there was going to be some kind of reckoning. Nobody's sure what that looks like. Did you see the video? The one from Thursday? Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. I saw it. Any idea? Nobody's saying anything definitive, Marcus said. But it didn't come from the drivers. We don't have access to the lobby footage. He paused. There's a short list of people who do. Liam didn't push it. He filed it. The lobby was filling up. Staff were filtering in from the elevators, finding seats or standing near the walls. There were rows of chairs arranged for the purpose, but the room was large enough that a lot of people were going to be standing. He could feel the particular energy of a crowd that didn't know exactly what was coming, but had been told to pay attention. He found a place near the side wall, not far from the front, where he had a clear line of sight to the presentation screen but wasn't in the center of anything. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and watched the room fill. A woman he didn't recognize came and stood nearby, holding a tablet. She glanced at his visitor badge, then at his face, and then nodded once in a way that suggested she knew who he was and had been expecting him. At 9:02, the room went quiet before it was told to. Vanessa Blake came in from a side door, not the main entrance, which Liam realized had been strategic. She was already at the front of the room before most people had registered her arrival. She was dressed the way he'd seen her in corporate photos, dark jacket, composed, the kind of put together that looks like it required no effort and actually requires enormous effort. Her hair was back. Her expression was settled in the way of someone who had been awake before 4 and had used the time. She stood at the front without a podium. Someone had set up a microphone on a small stand, but she didn't touch it immediately. She just stood there and let the room finish going quiet, and the last few conversations dropped off one by one until there was nothing. Then she said, without preamble, "I'm going to keep this direct." Her voice carried without the microphone. She had the particular projection of someone who had been speaking in rooms since she was young and understood that clarity was more powerful than volume. Last weekend, a photograph was shared on company platforms and publicly. It showed one of our drivers, Liam Carter, helping me out of a car and into my building after the anniversary celebration. By the following morning, that photograph had become the basis for a story, shared by people in this company and outside it, that accused Mr. Carter of misconduct. The room was still. Mr. Carter was subsequently suspended pending investigation. That suspension should not have been initiated on the basis of a photograph and rumors. It was a procedural failure, and the responsibility for that rests with leadership, which means it rests with me. She paused. Not for effect, he thought, just to let it land accurately. On Thursday afternoon, an edited video was posted that combined existing footage with fabricated audio from the night of the party. That video was designed to look like evidence. It was not. It was created to preempt this meeting. The person responsible for creating and distributing it is a member of this company, and that is being investigated now with the full cooperation of building security and our legal team. Liam watched the room. The stillness had changed quality. It had become the particular stillness of people recalibrating, people who had shared the video, or who had shared the photographs before it, or who had added their commentary to the thread. He watched the expressions, and he saw what Dana had said on the phone, people trying to figure out if they were in trouble. Before I show you what the actual security footage contains, Vanessa continued, I want to say something about the week we've just had, because the footage only addresses part of the problem. She looked out in the room, not scanning it, he noticed, but actually looking at sections of it, actually making contact. The problem is that hundreds of people in this building saw a photograph and immediately built a narrative around it, not cautiously, not with skepticism, immediately and with confidence, and then shared it, and then added to it, and then made sure it spread as far as possible. She stopped again. Let it sit. That's not about one driver and one photograph. That's about what kind of company we are, what we think is acceptable behavior toward our colleagues, what we do when something looks a certain way and we have no actual information. I've been asking myself this week what we've built here and whether it matches what I intended, and the honest answer is not entirely, not in this. Liam stood against the wall and felt the weight of the room around him. He had imagined this moment, or something like it, during the long evenings of the last week, but he had imagined it as vindication, which was something sharp and immediate. What it actually felt like was different, heavier, more complicated, the way things usually are when you're inside them instead of imagining them from a distance. I'm going to show you the footage now, she said, not because you require convincing at this point. I think most of you have already understood what happened, but because Mr. Carter's reputation was damaged publicly, and repairing it requires the same visibility. She nodded to someone at the back of the room. The lights dimmed slightly. The screen behind her illuminated. Shot. The footage was 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Liam knew the footage, obviously. He had lived it. But watching it in this room, with 300 and some people standing in silence around him, was strange in a way he hadn't anticipated. It was like watching a memory play out with an audience who hadn't been there. The lobby camera, the elevator, the timestamp, the hallway footage, the front door opening, both of them going in, and then the long static hours of an empty hallway until 5:48 when the door opened again and he came out alone. The shoulder roll. He had forgotten about the shoulder roll. He watched himself pause in the hallway and work out the stiffness in his back from the couch, and then walk to the elevator with the unhurried movement of a man who had done what he came to do and was now going home. Nobody in the room said anything. The screen went dark. The lights came back up. Vanessa turned back to the room. That's what happened, she said. Mr. Carter drove me home. He helped me to my door. He stayed on my couch because he didn't feel right leaving a person alone who wasn't fully well. He left at 5:48 in the morning, made his own way home, and went to work the same day. He never said anything publicly. He never defended himself. He went home and made his daughter breakfast. She paused. And then this company destroyed his reputation for a week. The room absorbed that. His suspension is lifted, effective today. He is fully reinstated with back pay for the suspension period. A formal apology from the company will be on record. Then she said, Liam, would you come up here? He had not expected that. He stood still for a second, just a second, and then he moved from the wall toward the front. He was aware of the room turning toward him. He kept his eyes on the front and kept his face as neutral as he could manage, which was not entirely neutral because he was a person and not a photograph, and this was not a small moment. He stopped beside her. She turned to face him directly. Up close, he could see the tiredness under her composure, the signs of the same kind of week he'd had, wearing itself differently on a different person. I'm sorry, she said, directly, without ornament. This company failed you. He looked at her. He thought about what to say and he landed on the thing that was true and not complicated. Thank you for fixing it. She nodded once, and then quietly enough that it was just between them. I should have moved faster. You moved when you knew, he said. She looked at him a moment. Something in her expression adjusted slightly. Not relief, but something adjacent to it. She turned back to the room. We're going to spend the next several weeks reviewing how this happened, she said, addressing the full room again. That means looking at our internal communication protocols, how personnel matters are handled, and what systems we put in place to prevent a rumor from being treated as fact. I'm creating a new team to oversee that process. The ethics and conduct review that comes out of that will be shaped, in part, by Mr. Carter. Liam looked at her. That's something I haven't discussed with you yet, she said, turning to him with the slight wryness of a person who had planned a surprise that she was aware was also a little inconsiderate. So I'm asking in front of everyone, which is a tactic I won't defend. A few people in the room exhaled. Not quite a laugh, but the sound of 300 people releasing some fraction of the tension they'd been holding. You want me to run an ethics review, he said. I want you to help build one, she said. You can drive if you still want to. That's your call. But I'd like your voice in the room where the policies get made. She paused. You have a particular point of view that I think this company needs. He stood there in the front of a room full of people who had spent the last week believing the worst about him, and thought about what it would mean to say yes, not as vindication. He'd already gotten past wanting vindication somewhere around Tuesday afternoon, but as something else, a purpose that ran in a direction he hadn't anticipated. I'd have to understand the scope, he said. That's a reasonable answer, she said, and I'd need to be able to do it honestly. Not just, I won't be a decoration. I'd be disappointed if you were, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at this room, at the 300 faces, some still recalibrating, some watching him carefully. A few that held something that might have been embarrassment or might have been genuine remorse. Marcus, near the back, arms crossed, with an expression that for Marcus qualified as enthusiastic approval. The woman with the tablet near the wall. Okay, he said. We can talk about it. The room didn't disperse quickly. People lingered in the way they do when something significant has just happened and they haven't processed it yet. Vanessa was immediately drawn into a cluster of senior staff at the front. There were operational things that needed to happen, investigations to formalize, HR coordination, legal review. He watched her shift from the person who had just given that address to the person who ran the company. The transition happening in about 30 seconds, seamless but visible if you were paying attention. He moved toward the side of the room where it was easier to breathe. Marcus found him. That was something, Marcus said. Yeah. The shoulder roll thing in the footage. Marcus almost smiled, which was its own kind of event. That's going to follow you. Great, Liam said. A few people came up to him in the next 15 minutes. Some of them said things that were clearly genuine. A woman from accounting who said she'd thought the story was wrong from the beginning and hadn't said so and was sorry for that. A young guy from the mail department who just said, that was messed up, man, with the simple directness of someone who hadn't learned yet to qualify things. Liam accepted all of it without ceremony. He didn't perform forgiveness and he didn't perform anger. He said what was accurate, that it was a hard week and he appreciated it. Two people who had specifically shared the original photographs with commentary didn't come to him at all. He noticed that and filed it and let it go. Derek Cole did not appear in the room. Liam didn't ask about it. Priya, the assistant, he recognized her from the photo, Priya's employee badge, approached him near the water station. Mr. Carter, when Miss Blake has a few minutes, she'd like to speak with you briefly, if you're able to stay. I can stay, he said. He found a chair near the window and sat down. He took out his phone. He called Dana. She answered on the second ring. Well, she said. She showed the footage to the whole company. A pause. How many people? Close to 300 in the room. The rest streamed it, I think. And she offered me a job. Kind of. She asked in front of everyone, which... He stopped. Which is a whole thing. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then, What kind of job? Ethics review. Building new conduct policies. Still not entirely clear on the scope. A longer pause. He could hear her processing. Liam! I know. That's not a driving job. I know. You're 32 years old and a billionaire CEO offered you a job in front of her whole company. I know, Dana. Because you slept on her couch. Because He stopped. It's more complicated than that. Is it? He looked out the window at the city, the ordinary Friday city, going about its business. I said I'd talk to her about it. I haven't said yes. But you're going to. He thought about the dragon book on Sophie's nightstand. He thought about the bird drawing on the refrigerator, held up by the watermelon magnet. He thought about what it had felt like to sit in his apartment for a week and watch the clock and pay the water bill and wait for a company that had suspended him to decide his fate. I'm going to talk to her, he said, and we'll see. Yeah. He waited another 20 minutes before Priya appeared again and gestured for him to follow. The office was on the 21st floor, high enough that the city looked different from up here, arranged differently. The proportions shifted. Vanessa was standing at her desk when he came in, jacket off now, the particular posture of someone who had been standing at the same desk for years and knew every inch of it. There were 2 monitors and a cleared workspace and a single framed photograph he couldn't see from the doorway. She looked up when he came in. Close the door. He closed it. He didn't sit until she gestured to the chairs across from the desk, and then he sat. She remained standing, which he recognized as a habit of thought rather than a power move. Derek Cole resigned this morning, she said. He looked at her. Before the meeting? About an hour before. He submitted his resignation by email, which I found, she chose the word carefully, convenient. The video, Liam said. We believe so. We don't have confirmation yet. Legal is pulling the access logs for the building's camera system. She picked up a pen, turned it once in her hand, put it down. He wasn't acting alone in the sense that the culture he operated in made it easy, but the specific action of creating and distributing that video, that was targeted. It was targeted at you, and it was timed to land before this morning. Why would he care that much? Liam asked. About me, specifically. She was quiet for a moment. Because the meeting was a problem for him, a meeting where I take public responsibility for a failure in how this company operates. That's a meeting that invites people to look at other failures. Derek has been managing this company's internal culture for 3 years. Some of what he managed looked to him like efficiency. It would look under scrutiny like something else. Liam sat with that. You said you'd want to do this honestly, she said. Not as a decoration. I meant it. I know you did. She finally sat in the chair across from him rather than behind the desk, which surprised him slightly. So I'm going to be honest with you about what I'm asking. This isn't a figurehead role. I want someone who will actually read the policies, talk to the staff, understand where the gaps are. Someone who knows what it feels like to be on the other side of one of those gaps. She looked at him directly. That's a different kind of qualification than an MBA. I don't have an MBA, he said. I know. I'm a driver. You're a driver who spent a week having your reputation systematically dismantled and didn't once do anything that made it worse, she said. That's not nothing. That's actually a specific and rare quality. He was quiet for a moment. What does it pay? He said. She told him. He kept his expression even, which required some effort. That's significantly more than my current salary, he said. Yes. Why? She looked at him with a slight expression, not quite exasperation, but the look of someone who has given a straightforward answer and is waiting for it to be accepted. Because it's a more demanding job and I want the person doing it to be compensated correctly. He looked at the window, the city, rearranged from up here, different proportion, same place. My daughter has school until 3, he said, and she does soccer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those aren't optional. We can work around that. I'm not going to be available at 7 a.m. on days when she needs to be dropped off. I have a 7 a.m. call most mornings, Vanessa said. I'm aware that's a problem. You've actually told me so. He looked at her. She looked back, and there was the not quite smile again. The one that started and didn't quite finish, but that he was beginning to recognize as the expression she made when something landed right. "I want to see the scope in writing," he said. "That's reasonable. And I want a week to think about it." "Also reasonable." He stood up. She stood with him. "Liam," she said. He looked at her. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and it registered. "I know this week was hard. I know an apology in a conference room doesn't fully address that." "It addressed the part that mattered," he said. She nodded. "How's your daughter?" "She thinks the whole situation was exactly like when her teacher makes someone apologize in class," he said. Something moved through Vanessa's expression. Real this time. Clear and uncomplicated. She might be right. "She usually is," he said. "I'll see you next week." He shook her hand, a firm, brief handshake, the ordinary kind, and walked out of the office and down the hall to the elevator. On the way down, he loosened his tie, because he'd been wearing it for 3 hours, and that was approximately his limit. He rode down to the lobby. He walked through the revolving door that always needed slightly more push than made sense. He stood on the sidewalk in the Friday afternoon light. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Sophie's school, which made his stomach drop for half a second before he saw the second notification. Sophie forgot her permission slip. Can someone drop it by before 2? The field trip. The one he'd already paid for. He checked his pocket. He'd put it in his jacket pocket that morning and forgotten to give it to her at the bus stop. "Of course," he said to nobody. He flagged a cab. He gave his home address. He sat back as the city moved past the windows and thought about the week behind him and the week ahead and the very specific and pressing problem of getting a permission slip to a school by 2 o'clock. Some things, no matter what else is happening, stay stubbornly ordinary. He had always found that more reassuring than anything else. The cab moved through traffic. He looked out the window. He already knew he was going to take the job. He got the permission slip to the school by 1:47. The secretary at the front desk took it with the particular patience of someone who had seen this specific situation many times and held no judgment about it. He thanked her. He walked back out into the Friday afternoon and stood on the school steps for a moment, tie still loosened, jacket open, the week settling around him like dust after something has fallen. He called Dana from the steps. "It's done," he said when she answered. "The meeting? Everything, the footage, the apology, the whole thing. Derek Cole resigned this morning before it even started." A silence. Then, "He resigned. Before the meeting. Preemptive, I think. Legal is pulling the access logs on the building footage. They believe he's the one who made the video." So he panicked. Looks like it. Dana was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, the particular quality of her silence when she was processing something and deciding not to say all of it. "And you?" she said finally. "How are you?" He looked at the school steps, the ordinary Friday street, a woman walking past with a stroller and a coffee cup, and the specific focused expression of someone managing 3 things at once. "I'm okay," he said. "Actually okay, not managing it okay." "Good." A pause. "And the job?" "I'm going to take it." "Yeah," she said. "I know." "You don't know." "Liam, I've known you for 32 years. You already decided in the cab, didn't you?" He said nothing for a moment. "In the cab," she said again, not as a question. "On the way to get the permission slip," he admitted. She laughed, a real one, the kind she saved for moments that were simultaneously absurd and perfect. "Only you," she said. "Only you would make a major life decision on the way to drop off a permission slip." It was a quiet ride. I love you," she said. "Tell Sophie I said hi." He picked Sophie up at 3:15 and she came through the school doors at a run the way she always did, backpack bouncing, already talking before she reached him. "We're going to the Science Museum on Monday, and there are real dinosaur bones, and B said they're fake, but I looked it up and they're real casts, which is almost the same thing. Slow down. And also I need new sneakers for soccer because mine have a hole, and also how did the meeting go?" He blinked at the gear shift. "The meeting went fine." She stopped walking. He stopped with her, on the sidewalk in front of the school. "Fine like really fine, or fine like you're not telling me yet?" He looked at her. the backpack, the dinosaur socks visible above her sneakers, the hole he could see now on the left toe, the expression on her face that was 7 years old and also somehow ageless, the particular attention she gave to things she decided mattered. Fine, like really fine, he said. She studied him for another second. Then she nodded once, the decisive, case-closed nod, and went back to walking, back to the dinosaur bones and the sneakers and the injustice of B's skepticism, and he walked beside her through the ordinary Friday afternoon and let the week finally, fully, start to be over. Bam. He signed the offer letter the following Wednesday. There had been a week of back and forth. He'd read the scope document twice, asked 4 questions that Priya relayed and Vanessa answered in writing, and pushed back on one element of the reporting structure that he thought was too indirect. She had agreed with the pushback, which surprised him slightly and probably shouldn't have. The role was formally titled Director of Ethics and Professional Conduct, which was a title that felt too large every time he read it, and which he suspected he would simply not look at as often as possible. The practical reality of it was more manageable. He would spend the first 3 months reviewing existing policies, interviewing staff at every level. Not executives, staff, the people whose names weren't on the building, and building a report on where the company's stated values and its actual daily culture had separated from each other, which, he already understood, was in more places than one. He would report directly to Vanessa. He would have a small team to be determined. He would keep his own hours as long as the work was done, which was the condition he'd asked for and which she'd agreed to with the specific practicality of someone who measured output and not presence. He drove Sophie to school the morning he signed it, and on the way back he sat in the car outside his building for a few minutes before going up. He wasn't processing anything in particular. He was just sitting with the quiet, the way you sometimes need to sit with the moment before a new thing starts, in order to respect what the old thing was. He had driven for a living for 6 years. He had been good at it. He had liked the particular solitude of it, the simple transaction of getting people from where they were to where they needed to be. There was a clean integrity to that work that he had never taken for granted. He was going to miss it some. He was honest with himself about that. Then he went upstairs and made coffee and opened the company laptop they'd sent over and started reading. The first 3 months were not smooth, which was the accurate way to describe them. The report he'd been asked to build required conversations that a lot of people didn't want to have, not because they were dishonest necessarily, but because the culture of a company that had grown quickly and profitably had developed certain habits of looking away. At the treatment of lower-level staff, at the way complaints were processed, at the specific mechanics by which people like Derek Cole had been able to operate for years without meaningful oversight. These were not dramatic revelations. They were the ordinary accumulations of a company that had prioritized speed and result over process, which was most companies, which did not make it acceptable. He sat in break rooms and conference rooms and, twice, in the parking garage because someone was more comfortable talking there. He listened more than he spoke. He took notes by hand, which people responded to differently than typing. Something about the slower pace of it seemed to make them trust that he was hearing rather than processing. He was not always the right person for the room. There were conversations about structural HR policy, where he needed the actual HR knowledge he didn't have. And he said so directly and brought Karen Marsh in, who turned out to be, once someone had given her the authority to say the things she'd been carefully noting for years, a sharp and useful partner. He was not always patient. There were meetings where someone was being deliberately vague about something they clearly knew, and he had to sit on the part of himself that wanted to say, "Just tell me what you saw," and instead ask the question sideways and wait. He got better at it. There was a Tuesday in November, about 2 months in, when he was presenting preliminary findings to Vanessa and 2 board members, and one of the board members, an older man named Hargrove, who had been on the board since the company's founding, pushed back on a finding about the complaint process in a way that was dismissive rather than substantive. "You're describing a cultural problem," Hargrove said. "Culture doesn't change with a policy document." "No," Liam said, "but policy is where accountability starts. Culture follows accountability. It doesn't lead it." Hargrove looked at him. The specific appraisal of a man deciding whether to take him seriously. Liam looked back. He had nothing to prove to Hargrove specifically, which was a position that turned out to be fairly comfortable. "He's right," Vanessa said from the end of the table. "Continue." He continued. Afterward, in the hallway, she fell into step beside him briefly. "Hargrove is difficult," she said. "I noticed. He responds to specificity. Less philosophy, more numbers. I'll build more data into the next presentation." "That would help?" A pause. "You handled it well?" "I've been in harder rooms," he said. She glanced at him. "The custody hearing?" He stopped walking. She was 2 steps ahead before she turned, and her expression had the slight tightness of someone who had said something they weren't sure they should have. "You read my file," he said. "I read everyone's file. That's in my personal... It's in the company's HR record from when you were hired. The character reference section." She held his gaze. "You put it there yourself. You listed it as context for your employment gaps." He stood there for a moment, working through that. She was right. He had listed it years ago, in the plain factual way he listed most things. Brief employment gap due to family court proceedings. He hadn't thought about it since. "It's relevant context," she said more carefully. "I wasn't..." "It's fine," he said. "You're right. I put it there." A brief quiet between them in the hallway. "Sophie's okay?" she asked. It was the way she asked it, not as small talk, but as an actual question. "She's great," he said. "She's decided the gravel project was a waste of time. She's moved on to convincing her whole class to read the Dragon books." "Is it working?" "Disturbingly well," he said. 3 kids are already on book 2. Vanessa looked at him a moment, and the not-quite smile arrived, and this time, finished. A full one. Brief, but real. "That tracks," she said, and turned and went back to her office. He stood in the hallway a second, and then went back to his desk. He thought about that exchange later, more than it probably warranted. The thing about Vanessa Blake was that she was not easy to read, and he had stopped trying to read her in the way you read people you're trying to impress or manage. She was his employer, then his direct report, then, gradually, through the daily frictions of building something together, something more complicated and less categorizable than either. She worked too much, which he had told her once in a meeting and which she had acknowledged and not changed. She had a habit of sending emails at 11 at night that required responses, which he addressed by setting a policy for himself. He would respond to them the next morning, and he told her so directly, and she had said fair without making it complicated. She was precise with language in a way that was sometimes exhausting and often useful. She did not apologize easily, but when she did, she meant it. He knew this from direct experience. She asked about Sophie occasionally, with that same quality of actual inquiry rather than courtesy. He answered honestly because dishonest answers to genuine questions had always felt like a small waste. It was not a friendship exactly. It was something that was building toward something, slowly and without announcement, the way real things tend to build. He didn't examine it too closely. He had learned over the years that examining things too closely before they were ready to be examined was its own kind of damage. The formal ethics review was completed in January and presented to the full board. He had worked on the final document for 3 weeks, which was the longest sustained writing project of his life, including the cover letter he'd written for a job at 22 that he'd agonized over for 2 days. Karen Marsh had co-authored 2 sections. A consultant he'd brought in handled the legal compliance portions, but the core of it, the sections on accountability culture, on the conditions that allowed a rumor to become company-wide policy in 48 hours, on the specific ways that hierarchy silences the people closest to a problem, that was his. He presented it in the same boardroom where Hargrove had pushed back in November. Hargrove read the data sections first this time, which was what Liam had built for him, and was quieter. Vanessa sat at the end of the table and said almost nothing during the presentation, which he had learned to recognize as her version of attention, complete, unhurried, not filling space. At the end, she said, "Any questions for Mr. Carter?" There were questions. He answered them. He said, "I don't know," twice, both times with sources he'd consult and a timeline for response. He did not perform confidence he didn't have, because performed confidence was its own kind of dishonesty. and he'd spent enough time around people who practiced it to understand exactly what it cost. The board approved the implementation plan unanimously, which Hargrove voted for with the expression of a man conceding a point rather than agreeing with one, which Liam decided was close enough. Afterward, in the elevator with Vanessa, she said, "Well done." "We'll see how implementation goes," he said. "Always." They rode down 2 floors in silence. Then she said, "Sophie's birthday is coming up." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "HR file," she said, without a flicker. "She's listed as your dependent. Her birthday is not listed as my dependent's information." "You mentioned it in passing in October. I have a good memory." He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the elevator panel with the expression of someone who was not going to be embarrassed about paying attention. "It's the 22nd, he said. "I know." A pause. "If you were having any kind of gathering—" He looked at her. She looked at the elevator doors. The doors opened. "It's a 7-year-old's birthday," he said. "It involves balloons and probably too much sugar, and Sophie will almost certainly make someone organize something by color." "I know what children's birthday parties involve," she said somewhat stiffly. "Do you?" A pause. "No, not really." He laughed, a real one, involuntary, the kind that comes when something is honest and also funny. She looked at him with the not quite expression, and it broke into the actual smile again. "Come," he said, "if you want. 2 o'clock. I'll send you the address." She looked at him for a moment, the specific look of a person deciding whether to accept something at face value or search it for complications. Then she said, "Okay." They walked out of the building in separate directions, and he went to pick up Sophie from school. The party was on a Saturday, at the apartment and the small courtyard behind the building that the tenants shared but almost nobody used. Liam had strung lights along the fence, the cheap kind that cost $8 at the hardware store, but looked fine in the afternoon dark. He had made a cake, not from scratch, he was not that person, but from a box. The chocolate kind with the chocolate frosting that Sophie had specified in writing, which was how she made requests she considered non-negotiable. 6 kids from Sophie's class came. Mrs. Okafor sat in the corner of the courtyard with a cup of tea and watched the proceedings with the benevolent authority of someone who had raised 4 children and considered this a calm afternoon by comparison. Dana had driven in from Cleveland, which she'd announced the week before in a text that said, "I'm coming to the birthday party. Don't tell me there's no room, I've slept on your couch before." She arrived at noon and immediately started rearranging the kitchen with the casual confidence of someone who had grown up in it, which she sort of had. "The cake is lopsided," she said. "It's fine," Liam said. "One side is higher than the other." "Sophie knows. She said it gives it character." Dana looked at the cake. She looked at him. "She said character. She's been using that word a lot lately. I think she got it from a book." "Your kid is something else," Dana said, and started on the chips. Vanessa arrived at 2:15, slightly late, which surprised him, because she was not a late person. She was wearing something that was notably less formal than anything he'd seen her in during work hours: dark jeans, a jacket, her hair down. She stood at the entrance to the courtyard for a moment with the expression of someone who was sure they had the right address, but was recalibrating the context. Sophie spotted her before he could make introductions. Sophie had no concept of Vanessa Blake as a billionaire CEO. She had a concept of Vanessa Blake as the person who had, according to her father's summary, fixed a problem at work. And in Sophie's understanding of the world, people who fix problems were straightforwardly on the right side, and that was the end of the analysis. She walked up to Vanessa with her party hat slightly crooked and said, "Are you the one who showed everyone the video?" Vanessa looked down at her. "Yes." "Good," Sophie said. "My dad didn't do anything wrong. Do you want cake? It has character." Vanessa looked at the child for a moment with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the boardroom composure, not the tired clarity of the late-night emails. Something genuinely unprepared. Something that hadn't been managed into an expression yet. "I would like cake," she said. "Come on then," Sophie said, and walked toward the table, and Vanessa followed her, and Dana appeared at Liam's shoulder. "Is that—" she started. "Yes." "She looks different than I expected." "How did you expect?" I don't know. More, Dana gestured vaguely. CEO-ish. She's off the clock, he said. Dana watched Vanessa accept a piece of lopsided cake from Sophie with the careful attention of someone trying to navigate something they hadn't prepared for. Sophie was explaining the character of the lopsidedness in some detail. Vanessa was listening, actually listening, with the same quality of attention she brought to board presentations and late-night emails. She listens like you do, Dana said. He looked at her. When something matters to her, Dana said, she goes completely still. He watched Vanessa nod at something Sophie said, and Sophie's face did the thing it did when a person was taking her seriously. The small, satisfied light of it. Yeah, he said. She does. The party ran until 5:30, which was longer than planned, because the 6 kids had discovered that the courtyard lights could be rearranged on the fence to spell things, and the project had expanded beyond what anyone could reasonably contain. Mrs. Okafor had gone home at 4 with the satisfied expression of a woman who had done her social duty. Dana was washing dishes inside. She had simply started doing it and continued for the better part of an hour. The kids' parents arrived in shifts, collecting children who were overstimulated and sugar-adjacent and fully happy. At some point in the late afternoon, Liam found himself standing near the fence with Vanessa while Sophie supervised the final configuration of the lights, which now spelled something that was either HI or HL depending on the angle. She's great, Vanessa said. I know. I mean, genuinely. She's the most certain person I've met in months. He watched Sophie direct a small boy named Marcus Jr. No relation. On the precise placement of a string of lights with the focused authority of someone who had a clear vision and the patience to see it realized. She's been like that since she could talk. I used to worry it would cause problems. Has it? Occasionally, he said, but mostly it just causes gravel to be sorted. Vanessa smiled, and this time it wasn't brief. It stayed. They stood there for a moment in the quiet space between conversation, the lights strung above them, the sounds of the city running under everything the way they always did. And something in the quality of the moment was different from the hallway and the boardroom and the elevator. More settled, less transactional, the kind of thing that doesn't have a name while it's happening. I owe you something, Vanessa said. He looked at her. An actual apology. She looked at the lights, not at him. Not the one in the conference room. That one was real, but it was a public act. It served a purpose. She paused. I mean a private one. For taking a week to act. I had the footage by Sunday night. I sent the messages to HR and Derek, but I didn't move immediately. I moved on Monday. He thought about Sunday, the apartment, the dragon book, Sophie's feet under the blanket, the night where he'd decided to stop waiting and start planning. You moved when you understood what happened, he said. I moved when I'd confirmed it 3 times, she said, which is my habit. Confirm, then act. It protects me from making decisions on incomplete information. A pause. It cost you a day. It cost me a day where I was already home and okay, he said. Still. He looked at her. The lights were a little unsteady in a light wind, moving slightly, making her face shift between shadow and warmth. She was looking at the fence, not at him, and in the absence of the composure she maintained in every professional setting, she looked like a person who was tired of some things and uncertain of others, and working with what she had, which was what most people looked like when the performed version was resting. Vanessa, he said. She looked at him. It's okay, he said. It's genuinely okay. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Not the quick, decisive nod of a decision made, but the slower kind. The kind that means something has been received and put somewhere real. Okay, she said. The lights flickered. Sophie announced from across the courtyard that the message now said, hi, definitively, and that everyone needed to come look, and the moment broke, and they went to look at the lights. Sophie's bedtime that night took longer than usual because she had opinions about the day that needed to be processed out loud. B didn't come, she said from under her blanket. This had not been a concern when the party was happening, which meant it had surfaced in the quiet. Liam sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Her mom said she was sick, but I think she just didn't want to come. Maybe she was actually sick, he said. Sophie considered this. Maybe. A pause. Marcus Jr. is nice, though. He was good with the lights. He was very precise. Yeah. She pulled the blanket up. I liked Vanessa. He looked at her. She listened, Sophie said. Like, actually listened, not like she was waiting for me to stop talking. I know, he said. Is she going to come to things again? He thought about the fence and the lights and the thing that didn't have a name while it was happening. I don't know yet, he said. Sophie accepted this with her usual economy. Then, Dad.
Yeah?
Remember when I asked if you did something wrong and you said no, and I said then it'll get sorted? I remember. She looked at him with the clear, direct attention he had been navigating since she was 4 years old. I was right, she said. He looked at her. You were right, he said. She nodded. The case closed nod and closed her eyes. He sat there until her breathing settled. He turned off the lamp. He went to the kitchen and stood at the window for a while, the way he had all week during the worst of it, except that this time the street below was just a street, not a symbol of indifference, just the ordinary, continuing, unconcerned life of a city going about its evening. He thought about what the last several months had cost and what they'd returned. He thought about Derek Cole, who had been dismissed by the board pending legal review, whose exit had been so swift and clean that the company had already partially forgotten the shape of the problem he represented, which was its own warning sign and part of what the ethics report addressed. He thought about Karen Marsh, who had finally stopped careful neutraling everything and was turning out to be one of the better people in the building. He thought about Marcus, still driving, who had stopped by his office 2 weeks ago to say he didn't know how this management stuff worked, but that the new complaint portal already had 11 submissions from drivers who'd been sitting on things for years. He thought about what Vanessa had said in the hallway in November. Culture follows accountability. It doesn't lead it. He had said that. He still believed it. But he understood now, 3 months in, that it was easier to say than to build, and the building was slow and imperfect and required the willingness to be wrong in specific, documentable ways and try again. He was learning that. He thought about the first morning of the suspension. Sophie coming into the kitchen in her dinosaur socks asking about the good eggs versus the fast eggs, and how that morning had felt like the edge of something terrible, and how he'd stood at the stove and made the good eggs with cheese anyway, because the day required eggs regardless of everything else. He had thought, during the worst of that week, that he was learning what people were capable of when they had a story to tell and no reason to question it. And he had learned that. But he had also learned something smaller and less dramatic and more useful, that most people, when given an accurate picture, will adjust, slowly and not without resistance, and not all of them, and with varying degrees of genuine reckoning versus strategic repositioning, but most of them. And some of them, a few, will do it without being made to, will look at the thing and sit with the discomfort of having been wrong and not try to make themselves feel better about it. The woman from accounting who had said she'd thought it was wrong from the beginning and hadn't said so. Marcus, who had said his piece to the dispatch manager before any footage had been reviewed. Gene, the doorman, who had texted a stranger with information he didn't have to share. Those people existed. They existed in the building where he now worked, and in the city outside his window, and in every room he'd ever been in, quieter and less viral than the other kind, doing the small, unglamorous thing because it was the thing to do. He had been one of those people once, on a night he hadn't thought was significant, carrying a woman in 2 expensive shoes to a couch, leaving a note on an embossed notepad, locking the door behind him in the early morning of a city that wasn't watching. He hadn't done it for the outcome. That was the thing he wanted to remember. Not for himself, because he knew it, but in the way you keep the true version of something close so the distorted versions don't replace it. He had done it because it was the clear thing to do in front of him, and he did clear things when they were in front of him. The rest, the job, the apology in the conference room, the lights spelled out in Sophie's courtyard, Vanessa standing at the fence not looking at him, all of that had come from somewhere else. Not as a reward exactly. Life wasn't a ledger. He had been through enough to know that doing the right thing was no guarantee of anything. But sometimes it put you in a different place than you would have been otherwise, a place where different things became possible. He was in a different place, He stood at the window a little longer. The city moved below, doing what it always did. Indifferent and full and alive in all its specificity. The woman with the stroller and the kid on the too big bike and the delivery truck and all the 10,000 ordinary human transactions of a Friday evening. He thought about what he'd told Sophie when she was very small, 4 or 5, when she'd asked why he helped people he didn't know. He'd thought about it for a moment and then said, "Because they're in front of me." She hadn't fully understood it then. She'd accepted it the way kids accept things that are said with conviction. But lately, he had noticed her applying it. The gravel project, the dragon book spreading through the class, the way she'd walked up to Vanessa without ceremony or strategy and offered her cake and been completely herself. She had understood it. That was the thing that mattered most when he stood at the window on a Saturday night in January with the year turning into something new. Not the job or the apology or the ethics report or the outcome. That his daughter, in the middle of everything, had understood the thing he most wanted her to understand. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked the lock on the front door, the habit of years. He walked down the hall, past Sophie's room where she was deeply asleep with one foot outside the blanket in the way she always ended up, and into his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He thought, it was enough. All of it, the hard parts included, was enough. Not because it had ended well, though it had, mostly approximately, but because it had been real. The week of it and the months after it had been actually real in a way that soft weeks aren't, and he had been himself all the way through it, and Sophie had seen that, and that was the version of the story he wanted to keep. He lay down. He thought about the note on the coffee table one more time. "I drove you home last night. You're okay." The smallest possible thing. Written on an embossed notepad at 5 in the morning in someone else's apartment, not as a strategy or a calculation, just as the accurate summary of what had happened and what was true. He closed his eyes. Outside, the city kept moving. The lights on Sophie's fence were still up. He hadn't taken them down yet because she'd asked him to leave them for one more week. And he had, because some things don't need a reason beyond the asking. He fell asleep to the sound of it. The pipes, the elevator, the city humming underneath everything. The same sounds as always, unchanged, still there, still here.